In our last session, we read a letter from a woman who was upset at the selfishness of her father, especially toward her mother, and she wanted to know how to tell him about it. I suggested that changing her father was pretty much none of her business, and that her best approach would be to love him as he is. Now, back to the writer of the letter. Your father doesn't want your advice, so giving it just isn't appropriate. But your mother actually comes to you and complains about your father. When somebody comes to you and complains about something, they are giving you permission to express your opinion, whether they realize it or not. If they don't want to hear your opinion, then they need to complain to somebody else. So, when your mother complains about your father, you have choices to make, and they usually boil down to one or more of the following. 1, you could defend your father. 2, you could sympathize with your mother. 3, you could just listen, neither defending or sympathizing. 4, you could teach your mother something useful. Let's look at those choices. First choice, defend your father. We often do this without realizing it. We say things like, "Oh, Mom, I don't think Dad means to whatever." Or, "Well, but Dad is only whatever." We often defend the person being attacked, and we might be right. But when we do that, the person talking to us feels like we're not listening, or even that we're attacking them. So this is rarely a good choice. Now, I realize you probably don't do this because you're irritated by your father's behavior, but I bring it up because it's a common response, and our audience needed to be aware of this possibility. Second choice, sympathize with your mother. This one is tricky because it looks loving, and it gets you lots of points with your mother. You could say, and you probably do, "Oh, Mom, how could he treat you like that?" Or, "How could you put up with that?" Now, there's no doubt that she loves to hear that kind of stuff. That's the whole reason she complains. But if you sympathize with her, are you giving her what she needs? Does she feel loved? No, she doesn't. She just gets sympathy. She feels like a victim. And victims have to buy sympathy. They can't feel loved unconditionally. By sympathizing with victims, we actually make them feel more isolated and alone. Victims love our sympathy in the short term, but we're actually hurting them. In our next session, we'll talk about the third and the fourth choices.